There's a moment in every confrontation, silent, thin, and barely visible, where time stops breathing. Words hang in the air like suspended blades. Faces tighten, eyes flicker, and in that suspended world, power reveals itself. But it doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't shout. It doesn't gesture or plead. It waits. Because in a world obsessed with noise, the true sovereign is the one who speaks last, if he speaks at all. We were raised on the myth that to be heard is to be seen. That expression equals strength. That clarity is courage. But Machiavelli, exiled and forgotten, saw through the performance. He understood what most men never dare to admit, that the first to speak is the first to reveal his weakness. That every word you utter can and will be used against you, not in a court of justice, but in the battlefield of perception. So the wise man, the dangerous man, the man they fear even in his absence, he learns the discipline of silence, not out of shyness, but strategy. It begins in childhood. They teach you to raise your hand, to participate, to explain, to prove that you're following, that you belong, that you're worthy of the room. But those who truly command a room never audition for it. Think of the people who haunt your memory, not the ones who entertained, but the ones who withheld. The father who never needed to shout, the woman who left without a word, the man who listened more than he spoke and made you measure every sentence. They are the architects of psychological space. And in that space, your thoughts start to echo, not theirs, yours. That is the paradox of power. It doesn't require permission. It doesn't beg for recognition. It creates tension, and then lets that tension do the talking. Machiavelli knew that violence wasn't the most dangerous tool in a ruler's arsenal. It was anticipation, mystery, the controlled absence of reaction. He wrote not for the moral or the merciful, but for those who dared to govern others, and first, themselves. Silence, to him, was not emptiness. It was armor, a shield against interrogation, a fog that hid the real movement behind the throne. In war, the enemy who speaks first reveals his formation. In diplomacy, the first to negotiate reveals what he fears. In arguments, the one who defends has already conceded ground. And in love, the one who speaks his feelings first hands over the knife that will later be twisted in silence. This is not paranoia. This is history. Because people don't respect clarity. They manipulate it. What they respect, what they fear, is unpredictability. The silence that makes them question themselves. The man who can endure discomfort without reaching for words as a crutch. Watch how quickly a group adapts when one man refuses to explain himself. Watch how quickly aggression softens when it meets stillness instead of reactivity. That stillness is not passivity. It is presence, condensed, weaponized, lethal. Machiavelli believed in masks. He knew that if people could see all of you, they would not love you more. They would use you more precisely. So he spoke of veils, of partial truths, of gestures instead of declarations. In the court of Florence, where daggers were sharpened with flattery and betrayals disguised as loyalty, it was not the loud who survived. It was the unreadable. And what makes a man unreadable? Not mystery for mystery's sake, but the refusal to bleed on command. He knew that the moment you let others define you, you become their project and their prey. The moment you explain yourself, you lose control of the narrative. You lose control of the silence. And silence is the final territory. So what does this mean for you? The man in the meeting, the father in the house, the stranger on the street, the lover facing goodbye. It means stop filling every gap. Let silence speak. Let tension rise. And when you do speak, make every word heavy with restraint. Make them feel the weight of what you could have said, but didn't. Because in a world where everyone is broadcasting, screaming, tweeting, explaining, the man who does none of these becomes the one they can't stop watching. And that is the beginning of command. We grow up believing that transparency is trust, that explaining ourselves makes us safe, that being understood is a form of power. But Machiavelli knew otherwise. He knew that the human desire to be seen is not a strength, it's a weakness, a wound disguised as virtue. And in the hands of others, it becomes a leash. Modern culture teaches the opposite. Open up. Speak your truth. be emotionally available. The therapy speak of our age turns vulnerability into a kind of currency, one we're told will buy connection, respect, intimacy. But ask yourself, when has full exposure ever protected you? When you confessed your fears, did they cradle them gently? Or did they memorize them like codes to a vault they intended to rob? When you shared your doubts, did they reassure you? Or did they file them under leverage, to be retrieved when it served their narrative? Machiavelli would not be surprised. He wrote, "It is double pleasure to deceive the deceiver, because the moment you make yourself legible, you invite strategy. The moment your motives are known, so are your pressure points." This isn't cynicism. This is anatomy. Human interaction, at its rawest, is not built on mutual understanding. It's built on advantage. And visibility determines vulnerability. That's why the most dangerous man in any room isn't the one who demands attention. It's the one who withholds it. Because he cannot be calculated. He cannot be used. And more importantly, he cannot be controlled. You've seen this dynamic in every domain of modern life. In the workplace, it's the loud, eager, open-book employee who gets exploited, not promoted. While the quiet strategist, who speaks little and reveals less, ascends silently, his intentions unread. In relationships, it's the man who pours out his love too soon, his fears too quickly, his plans too openly, who becomes the one resented, not respected. Because his inner life becomes public property, and what is publicly owned is never privately cherished. Even in conflict, it's the one who explains, who justifies, who defends, that becomes the easier target. Because reaction is prediction, and prediction is prelude to defeat. This is the illusion you've been sold, that openness equals strength. But Machiavelli saw openness as an invitation to conquest. And he did not write for those who wanted to be loved. He wrote for those who wanted to last. In The Prince, he warns that rulers who rely on affection are doomed. That love is fleeting, conditional, disloyal. That power anchored in visibility will eventually drown under scrutiny. His solution was simple, brutal, effective. Control perception, not reality. Project what serves you. Conceal what endangers you. Smile in the court, plot in the shadows. And in a society like ours, one addicted to oversharing, confession, hyperexposure, the Machiavellian man becomes not just powerful, but mythical. Because he breaks the script. He resists the demand to explain, to apologize, to expose. And in doing so, he reclaims what modern culture is desperate to strip from him: sovereignty over his own mystery. It is not a coincidence that the algorithms of today reward emotional striptease, that our heroes cry on camera, that our leaders tweet their every impulse, that our authenticity is measured by how nakedly we bleed in public. Because what can be seen can be sold, and what can be sold can be shaped. So ask yourself, who benefits from your transparency? Your boss, who can now manipulate your ambitions? Your partner, who can now press on your fears? Your peers, who can now predict your next move? Because once people understand you, they do not love you more. They manage you better. That's why Machiavelli taught not just to resist full visibility, but to master selective illusion, to smile where suspicion rises, to nod when provoked, to leave sentences unfinished and motives undefined. And the results? You become the man they speak about when you leave the room. Not because you were loud, but because you were unreadable. And unreadable is unforgettable. We live in a world that has inverted the sacred. It treats confession as wisdom. Vulnerability is strength. Visibility is truth. But Machiavelli, in exile, betrayed by those who once cheered him, saw the rot beneath the virtue. He saw that power, real power, does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It does not kneel at the altar of being understood. It waits. It watches. It strikes only when the silence has done its work. And when it does, there are no warnings. Only consequences. This is the truth behind the curtain. The uncomfortable clarity you weren't meant to find. Not because it's evil, but because it's immune to flattery, immune to guilt, immune to the illusion that honesty is always noble. Because it isn't. Not when the world watches your honesty like a lion watching a wound. Machiavelli's silence is not coldness. It's command. Here's where everything starts to tilt. Because once you understand what Machiavelli actually revealed, you can't go back to the social script. Not without seeing the trap. For most people, the trap is built with compliments. You speak up in a meeting, they say you're confident. You open up in a relationship, they say you're honest. You admit a weakness, they call you brave. But none of these labels are neutral. They're positioning you, marking you. Now everyone knows what you're hungry for. Recognition, intimacy, affirmation. That's your price tag. And the moment they need something, cooperation, silence, loyalty, that's the lever they'll pull. Not aggressively, strategically, quietly, with precision. Most people don't even realize it. They think it's affection. But affection, when tied to exposure, becomes surveillance. This is where the internal crisis starts. Not in the heart, but in the pattern. You begin to notice how many of your interactions were never equal. How many times your openness was met not with deeper trust, but with subtle recalibration. Someone got quieter after your confession. Someone started testing your boundary after your compliment. Someone brought up your worst moment, not to hurt you, but to remind you. Because now it's a tool, and it belongs to them. Machiavelli's framework wasn't psychological theory. It was control theory. In his view, the goal was never to be safe. It was to be in control of the board. And that meant controlling what others could see. Because people only calculate what's visible. When you remove visibility, you remove prediction. It's the basis of every military doctrine. Never reveal your full capabilities. Never telegraph your next move. Never give your enemy something to aim at. And in modern life, enemy doesn't mean enemy. It means anyone who could shift power dynamics with a few words. A colleague, a lover, a friend, a parent. This is not about paranoia. It's about structure. When people don't know where you stand, they watch their own behavior more carefully. When people don't know what you feel, they test less. When people don't know what you want, they stop designing traps. Because traps require data. And Machiavelli's entire point was, don't provide it. That's the philosophical turn most people never make. They want a better life, but they want to earn it by being understood, by being good, by being open. Machiavelli said, fine, be good, but appear good. Not be, appear, and never at the cost of control. Because as soon as your behavior becomes reactive, defending yourself, explaining your mood, clarifying your motive, you've already conceded. The moment they know you'll break your silence to prove you're not guilty, you're controllable. The moment they know you'll speak just to be heard, you're predictable. And if you're predictable, you're already replaceable. So what's the shift? Not advice. Not a new routine. A posture change. You stop using words to resolve tension. You let tension sit. You stop correcting people's impressions. You let them guess wrong. You stop giving people tools to win the next argument before it starts. This doesn't mean you isolate. It means you structure your visibility. You choose what enters the record. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because if someone's view of you is based on silence, they don't know where to strike. They can't bait you with old mistakes. They can't design scenarios around your fears. They can't predict what you'll compromise for. That's when your presence shifts. And that's when they shift around you. People don't pull knives when they don't know if you're carrying one. People don't gossip when they're unsure who you report to. People don't manipulate when they're unsure what you already know. And if they try, they have to guess. And every guess is risk. This is what Machiavelli weaponized. Not deceit. Control of perception. Strategic fog. The kind that forces others to stay cautious, not entitled. Respectful, not familiar. Because when someone knows nothing for sure, they prepare for everything. And that's power. Not because you're aggressive. Not because you're dominant. Because they have to build their map around what they don't know. Most people will never do this. They're addicted to narrative, to being seen as consistent, as honest, as harmless. But in a high-stakes world, those are luxury beliefs. The man who holds his tongue holds the tempo, and the man who controls tempo controls the outcome. Once you've stripped away the reflex to explain yourself, once you've stopped broadcasting your intentions, you're left with something that most people find unbearable: silence. Not outer silence, but strategic silence. The kind that doesn't just disturb others, it starts to reshape you. This is where most fail. They reach this stage, realize they're no longer being seen, heard, or praised, and panic. They mistake invisibility for irrelevance. But that's because they've been trained to equate external response with internal power. Machiavelli's insight was different. He didn't seek approval. He sought position. And to gain position, you must exit the performance. You must become the observer, not the actor. That doesn't mean passivity. It means recalibration. You no longer move to be understood. You move to place pressure. Every word becomes a tool. Every silence, a calculation. In his letters, Machiavelli once described how even exile became useful. When he was cast out of politics, stripped of public standing, forced into isolation, that's when he wrote The Prince. Not as revenge, as blueprint. He didn't cry out. He built in silence. Because he understood something few ever do. When you stop trying to win sympathy, you can start building leverage. Leverage starts with information control. What you reveal, what you withhold, what you make people believe is true, and what you let them wonder about. Machiavelli's statecraft wasn't about inspiring faith, it was about managing perception with ruthless consistency. This is what modern people don't grasp. We live in a disclosure economy. Everyone's advertising their thoughts, their fears, their goals, their traumas. They think it makes them authentic. What it actually makes them is legible. And legibility is liability. If your opponent knows what outcome you want, they can construct a situation where every path leads you away from it. If your coworkers know your pressure points, they can shape interactions to make you reactive. If your partner knows your guilt pattern, they can reframe their behavior until you start apologizing for their choices. That's not abuse. That's strategy, poorly disguised by the language of intimacy. So what's the reconstruction? Not a return to strength, a move to structure. You start by removing default access. No one gets your thoughts without friction. No one gets your intentions without earning the right to misinterpret them first. You don't speak for transparency. You speak for effect. This applies in meetings. You say exactly enough to redirect attention, not enough to be questioned. This applies in relationships. You communicate stability, but not dependency. You become a presence, not a performance. And this applies in power. Because the less others know, the more they prepare. You think you're being fair by disclosing your motives. What you're actually doing is building a manual for how to influence you. You think you're being real by sharing your emotions. What you're doing is giving away leverage without charging a price. Machiavelli's fix isn't to withdraw. It's to obscure. He advises rulers to appear virtuous, appear, not be. Because people respond to appearance. They align with what they can predict. They obey what they fear might turn. That's why he constantly returns to the idea of calculated unpredictability. Not chaos. Not contradiction. Unreadability. When people don't know if you're capable of escalation, they stay respectful. When people can't tell if your silence means anger, disappointment, or indifference, they monitor their own behavior more carefully. You don't need to threaten. You only need to create risk in their mind. This is how presence becomes strategy. It removes certainty. And when people lose certainty, they reduce aggression. This also means learning to tolerate misinterpretation. You have to let people guess wrong about you and not correct them. That's the price of staying in control. Because the moment you start clarifying, you re-enter the frame they designed for you. And that's where you become accountable to illusions. Your power is in what's left unsaid. That's not mystique. That's operational advantage. And there's one final layer Machiavelli makes clear: detachment from being liked. People seek admiration. He sought influence. He knew admiration fades the moment it's inconvenient. Influence lasts as long as people remain uncertain. If someone admires you, they expect access. If someone respects you, they expect consequences. And it's consequences, not compliments, that create longevity. So the structure is this. You speak only when it serves control. You reveal only when the reaction benefits your position. You disappear when your presence becomes expected. And you return when your absence has made space for leverage. This isn't coldness. It's functional independence. You stop being an actor on someone else's stage. You become the man behind the curtain, not because you're hiding, but because you've seen the script. And now, you're rewriting it. Once you understand this framework, you start to notice how many people are stuck in the opposite: loudness, over-explaining, emotional appeals, spontaneous transparency. Not because they're malicious, because they're trained. The world teaches you to be loud when you feel uncertain. It rewards visibility with temporary praise. It tells you to be open, and then waits for the moment to punish you for it. But once you see it, you don't unsee it. In every negotiation, someone leaks too much too fast. In every argument, someone speaks out of the need to be understood and immediately gives up their position. In every social group, there's the person who says one line, perfectly timed, and shifts the mood of the room without raising their voice. That's the person no one forgets. That's the person everyone starts orbiting. Machiavelli wasn't writing rules for saints or philosophers. He wrote for survivors. He wasn't concerned with ideals. He studied results. And the conclusion he came to, the one that still applies centuries later, is as brutal as it is accurate. The man who doesn't speak is not empty. He is loading. People assume silence is ignorance, detachment, passivity. But operational silence isn't absence, it's force without noise. It's timing without announcement. It's discipline, not distance. You may have noticed it in your own life. The way someone who barely says anything is suddenly the person everyone consults when stakes rise. Or the way that after you stopped explaining, defending, or offering your perspective, others adjusted. Not because you changed your content, but because you stopped playing a readable character. Most people think strength is about confrontation. But in practice, most outcomes are determined by preparation, not reaction. And preparation requires one thing most people can't tolerate: privacy. You can't prepare while performing. You can't calculate while explaining. You can't build leverage while asking to be seen. Machiavelli knew this. That's why he insisted that rulers, and anyone who wishes to navigate power, learn to disconnect their internal state from their external behavior. You can feel pressure without showing it. You can be in doubt and still project control. You can be under threat and reveal nothing. This isn't a personality trait. It's a skill. It's a choice you make when you stop needing your environment to validate your direction. When you understand that visibility is not empowerment, it's a map others use to box you in. A well-written persona is just a contract you've signed without reading. So what's the end point? You don't become silent forever. You become silent until it's expensive to be ignored. You don't disappear. You reposition. You don't pretend you have no needs. You make it impossible to track how they guide your moves. That's not deception. That's control. And once you've seen how this works, you begin to rebuild everything, your conversations, your posture, your disclosures, around the only form of power that scales under pressure: information control. You choose your words like currency, not commentary. You leave impressions instead of explanations. You don't react to chaos. You let it run its course while you watch what everyone else reveals about themselves. Because people will always show their intentions too early. They will leak their strategy in an emotional outburst. They will confess their insecurities, expecting sympathy. They will describe their goals in detail, hoping for support. And they will never suspect that the quiet one in the room, the one who listens and nods and says little, is the one charting every opening they give away. If you've understood this episode, something should feel different now. Not like clarity, like discomfort with how much of yourself has already been sold in the currency of overexposure. That's the real ending Machiavelli offers. Not triumph, not peace, just control. If you've ever stayed quiet on purpose in a meeting, in a confrontation, in a relationship, and watched how the entire situation tilted in your favor. I want to know what happened. Share it in the comments. Not because I want your story, but because someone else will read it and realize for the first time that they're not losing by staying silent. They're winning slowly, strategically, and visibly.